I remember the rain because neither of us spoke over it. By the time it started falling hard enough to blur the windshield, the argument had already exhausted itself. It wasn't about anything remarkable. Bills, schedules, the familiar accusation that I never appreciated how much he carried. My insistence that respect wasn't something either of us should have to earn every day. From his side of the silence, I looked stubborn. From mine, I was simply too tired to defend my own reality again. He pulled onto the shoulder of the highway. I think you need a lesson, he said, keeping his eyes on the road ahead instead of looking at me. Maybe a long walk will help. For a moment I thought he was making a cruel joke. Then he reached across, opened my door, and waited. Daniel watched her step into the rain without protesting. That surprised him. He had expected tears, anger. Pleading instead, she gathered her coat around herself, closed the passenger door with unusual care, and stood beside the road. She didn't wave. She didn't shout. She only watched his taillights disappear into the curtain of rain. As he drove away, he convinced himself this was temporary. She would call. She would admit she'd pushed too hard. Tomorrow everything would return to normal. He had always believed silence meant surrender. The rain soaked through my sleeves in minutes. Cars hissed past, throwing mist into the air. 37 miles from home suddenly felt less like a distance and more like a sentence. Oddly, I wasn't frightened. I was grieving. The drive, not even the humiliation. I was grieving the realization that someone who claimed to love me had looked at my vulnerability and decided it was useful. I reached into my pocket for my phone, no signal. Then headlights slowed behind me. A black truck eased onto the shoulder. The driver's door opened. My bodyguard stepped out. Ma'am. His voice carried the same calm professionalism it always had. I've been trying to reach you for 12 minutes. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. You found me, we lost your scheduled route, and received an automatic location alert from your emergency device. He glanced briefly toward the empty highway before returning his attention to me. Are you injured? I shook my head. No. Can you safely tell me what happened? I looked once in the direction my husband had driven. He left me here. There was no dramatic reaction, no angry promises. My bodyguard simply nodded once, opened the passenger door, and said, "Let's get you somewhere warm." That simple sentence nearly broke me, not because it was emotional, because it was kind. Daniel's confidence lasted exactly 23 minutes. Her phone never rang. She never called his. When he finally turned around, the stretch of highway was empty. At first, he assumed she'd accepted a ride. Then uncertainty crept in. By the time he reached home, worry had replaced certainty. Still, he rehearsed his explanation. She had overreacted. He hadn't meant any real harm. People would understand, wouldn't they? At the security office, I wrapped my hands around a cup of hot tea while dry clothes arrived from my emergency travel bag. My bodyguard completed an incident report with quiet efficiency. Every question was factual. Time, location, weathered section of events. There was no attempt to persuade me toward anger. Only documentation. When he finished, he looked at me carefully. Because this occurred while you were under active protective coverage, we're required to notify your legal representative and our operations director. I nodded. I understand. For the first time in years, someone wasn't asking me to minimize what had happened. They were simply treating it as serious because it was. Daniel expected an emotional confrontation. Instead, he received a measured phone call the following morning. The incident had been formally documented because abandoning a protected client on an isolated roadway had created a significant safety risk. Any future coordination involving his wife's protected movements would no longer include him unless authorized. The voice on the line remained calm, professional and moved by excuses. When the call ended, Daniel realized something unfamiliar. The situation no longer belonged to him. His explanation wasn't the center of the story anymore. His decision had consequences beyond his intentions. Weeks later, friends asked whether I felt victorious. I never knew how to answer. There was nothing exciting about discovering the exact day a marriage stopped feeling safe. No celebration followed, only paperwork, long conversations, therapy, quiet mornings where I slowly learned that peace could exist without permission. Sometimes I still remembered standing in that rain. Not because it was the coldest I'd ever been, because it was the clearest I'd ever seen. He thought leaving me beside that highway would teach me obedience. Instead, it taught me the difference between someone who wanted control and people whose job was simply to keep me safe. When I think about that black truck now, I don't remember it as a rescue. I remember it as a boundary arriving exactly when I was finally ready to stop crossing my own.